Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the depths of the Orion cluster, far beyond the borders of the known galaxy, lay the planet of New Avalon. It was a paradise in the void, a jewel of a world that humanity had claimed as its own during the great colonization waves of the 23rd century. The settlers who first arrived on New Avalon found a world teeming with life, with vast forests stretching out beneath emerald canopies, towering mountains shrouded in mist, and oceans that sparkled under the light of twin suns. It was, in many ways, a second Eden, but one that now found itself at the heart of a looming conflict, a battle for survival that would determine the fate of its people. The day began like any other, with the colonists going about their daily routines, unaware of the dark cloud of war gathering on the horizon. The children of New Avalon played in the fields, their laughter echoing through the clear air, while the adults worked diligently to maintain the colony's infrastructure, ensuring that the settlement thrived in this remote part of space. But the peace was not to last. In the early hours of the morning, a sensor alert cut through the tranquility like a knife. The colony's long-range scanners had detected something, a massive fleet of ships, moving with precision and intent, heading straight for New Avalon. Commander Sarah Whitlock stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed the incoming fleet. She was a woman of formidable presence, with a sharp mind honed by years of military service. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back into a tight bun, and her piercing blue eyes betrayed none of the anxiety she felt as she analyzed the situation. The alien fleet was unlike anything they had encountered before, its ships sleek and menacing, bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire cities in seconds. The Zelani Dominion had come to New Avalon, and they were not here to negotiate. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," Sarah said, her voice calm and measured. She turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Reed, a young officer with a knack for unconventional tactics. "What's our status?" Marcus, who had been scanning the incoming data, looked up from his console. His brow was furrowed with concern. "Our defense grid is active, but it won't hold against a concentrated attack. We've got limited ground forces, mostly militia and volunteers. We're going to have to rely on guerrilla tactics if we want to stand a chance." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through potential strategies. The Zelani were known for their ruthlessness, their desire to enslave and conquer. Surrender was not an option. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage. This is our home, and we know it better than they do. If they want a fight, we'll give them one." The command was given, and the colony's defenses were brought to full readiness. The energy shields that surrounded the city were powered up, and the civilians were armed with whatever weapons could be found. The colonists, though not soldiers, were determined to protect their home. They had built this world from nothing, carving out a life on the edge of space, and they would not see it taken from them. As the Zelani fleet approached, the skies above New Avalon darkened with the arrival of their drop ships. The alien vessels descended like a plague of locusts, disgorging wave after wave of shock troops onto the surface. These warriors, clad in advanced armor and wielding energy weapons that cut through the air with deadly precision, began their assault on the outer defenses. The initial attack was swift and brutal, with the aliens overwhelming the colony's perimeter in a matter of hours, but the colonists were not defenseless. Under Marcus's leadership, small teams of fighters began to harass the invaders, striking from the cover of the dense forests and rugged mountains that surrounded the colony. They set traps, ambushed patrols, and sabotaged supply lines, using every trick they knew to slow the Zelani advance. It was a dangerous game, and many of the colony's defenders paid the ultimate price, but their efforts were not in vain. Each attack bought the colony precious time, delaying the inevitable confrontation. As the days dragged on, the Zelani forces grew increasingly frustrated. General Klyvar, the alien commander, was a creature of cold efficiency, a being bred for war. He watched the battle unfold from the bridge of his flagship, his many eyes narrowed in irritation. The humans were proving to be more resilient than expected, their guerrilla tactics disrupting his carefully laid plans. He ordered his troops to burn the forests, to bomb the mountains, to leave nothing standing that could be used by the defenders. In the midst of this chaos, Dr. Elena Verne, a scientist specializing in xenobiology, made a discovery that would change the course of the battle. Elena had been studying the unique flora and fauna of New Avalon for years, fascinated by the planet's ecosystem. During a retreat into the uncharted wilderness, she stumbled upon evidence of an ancient civilization that had once thrived on the planet, an advanced species known as the elderly. The elderly were long gone, their cities reduced to ruins and their technology forgotten by time, but they had left behind something extraordinary. Hidden deep within the forests and mountains were bioengineered organisms, designed by the elderly to protect their world from invaders. These creatures, dormant for millennia, could be awakened and used to turn the tide of the battle. Elena, realizing the potential of this discovery, immediately contacted Sarah and Marcus. With their support, she led a team of scientists and engineers into the heart of the wilderness, racing against time to activate the elderly defenses. It was a risky plan, but they had no other choice. The Zelani were closing in, and the colony's defenses were on the brink of collapse. The team's efforts paid off. Using the ancient control systems left behind by the elderly, they managed to awaken the bioengineered organisms. Massive, sentient trees that could shield the colony, predatory plants that attacked the Zelani troops, and even colossal creatures that emerged from the earth itself, all were unleashed upon the invaders. The alien forces, caught off guard by this unexpected resistance, began to falter. With the elderly defenses in play, the tide of the battle began to turn. Sarah rallied the remaining colonists, inspiring them with a rousing speech about human resilience and the will to fight for freedom. "This is our home," she declared, her voice echoing through the command center. "We built it with our hands, and we will defend it with our lives. The Zelani may think they can take it from us, but they've underestimated what it means to be human. We will fight, and we will win." The defenders, now bolstered by the planet's natural defenses, launched a counteroffensive. They reclaimed lost ground, pushing the Zelani back and inflicting heavy casualties on the alien forces. Marcus led his guerrilla fighters in daring raids, while Elena coordinated the deployment of the elderly organisms. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though victory was within their grasp, but the Zelani were not so easily defeated. General Klyvar, enraged by the unexpected resistance, ordered an all-out assault on the colony's capital. He deployed his most advanced war machines, towering mechs equipped with energy cannons, genetically engineered monstrosities that tore through the defenders like paper. The final battle was upon them. The streets of New Avalon became a war zone, with buildings reduced to rubble and fires raging out of control. Sarah led the defenders in a desperate last stand, determined to protect the colony's central command at all costs. The Zelani forces, relentless and merciless, pressed their attack, but the humans fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Marcus's guerrilla tactics, combined with the elderly defenses, inflicted heavy losses on the invaders, but the cost was high. Many of the colony's defenders, including civilians, were killed or wounded. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah realized that the Zelani were focusing their efforts on the colony's power generators. If they succeeded in disabling the generators, the energy shields that protected the city would fail, leaving them defenseless. Without hesitation, she made a decision that would seal her fate. She gathered a small team of volunteers and led them on a suicide mission to protect the generators. The battle at the power plant was brutal. Sarah and her team fought with everything they had, holding off wave after wave of Zelani soldiers. But they were outnumbered, and one by one, they fell. In the end, Sarah stood alone, her body battered and broken, but her spirit unyielding. She managed to hold the line long enough for the remaining defenders to regroup, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. With her final breath, she sent a message to Marcus, telling him to continue the fight, to protect New Avalon at all costs. As the last of the Zelani forces closed in on the colony's command center, the defenders prepared for what seemed like the end. But then, in the sky above, there was a sudden burst of light. A fleet of human ships, breaking through the clouds. The Federation had arrived. The sight of the Federation fleet reignited the colonists' will to fight. The Federation ships descended upon the Zelani with overwhelming force, their weapons tearing through the alien vessels with precision. The Zelani, caught between the defenders on the ground and the Federation fleet in the sky, were forced to retreat. Their assault on New Avalon had failed. With the Zelani in full retreat, the battle was over, but the cost was devastating. New Avalon lay in ruins, its cities reduced to rubble, its population decimated. The survivors gathered in the remains of the central square, mourning the dead and honoring the heroes who had given their lives to protect their home. Commander Sarah Whitlock was among those honored, her sacrifice ensuring that New Avalon would live on. Lieutenant Marcus Reed, now promoted to commander, stood before the survivors, his heart heavy with the weight of his new responsibilities. He vowed to rebuild New Avalon, to make it a symbol of human resilience and defiance. Dr. Elena Verne, her work far from over, continued her study of the elderly defenses, hoping to use the knowledge to protect other colonies from the same fate. As the sun set over the battered landscape, Marcus reflected on the price of freedom. The defenders of New Avalon had proven that humanity would not be enslaved, no matter the cost. They had faced overwhelming odds, and they had emerged victorious, but the victory was bittersweet. The colony would rebuild, but it would never be the same. In the end, New Avalon stood as a testament to the unbreakable spirit of humanity, a spirit that would continue to burn brightly, even in the darkest of times. As the final remnants of the Zelani fleet disappeared into the depths of space, the atmosphere on New Avalon was heavy with both relief and grief. The battle was over, but the scars it left behind would linger for generations. The once thriving colony now lay in ruins, its cities reduced to smoldering wreckage, and its fields scorched and barren. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the distant echoes of what had been a desperate, brutal fight for survival. Commander Marcus Reed, newly promoted in the wake of Sarah Whitlock's sacrifice, stood on the remains of a balcony that once overlooked a bustling town square. Now, the square was filled with the injured and the weary, those who had survived but would never be the same. Marcus felt the weight of his new role pressing down on him, the responsibility of leading these people through the aftermath of the siege. His eyes scanned the scene below, where Dr. Elena Verne moved among the wounded, her hands stained with the blood of those she was trying to save. Despite the devastation, she was focused, driven by the knowledge that her work was far from over. The elderly defenses had been instrumental in turning the tide of the battle, but they had also raised new questions. What other secrets did this planet hold? Could they unlock more of the ancient technology to aid in the colony's rebuilding, or perhaps to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again? Marcus knew that the answers to these questions were crucial, but for now, the priority was survival. The colony had lost so much: lives, infrastructure, hope. Yet, in the face of all this, there was still a spark of resilience. The people of New Avalon were battered, but they were not broken. They had endured the unendurable and had emerged on the other side. Now, it was up to him to lead them through the next phase, rebuilding. The Federation fleet, now in orbit above the planet, had dispatched teams to assist with the recovery efforts. Supplies were being distributed, and the wounded were being evacuated to the medical ships for treatment. But Marcus knew that the real work would begin once the immediate crisis had passed. Rebuilding the colony would take time, resources, and, above all, the will to start anew. As he watched the Federation troops coordinate with what was left of the colony's defense forces, Marcus thought back to Sarah's last words to him. She had entrusted him with the future of New Avalon, and he would honor that trust. But it wasn't just about rebuilding walls and infrastructure, it was about rebuilding the spirit of the people. They had faced annihilation and had fought back with everything they had. That spirit, that unyielding determination, was what would carry them forward. He made his way down the crumbling steps of the command center, moving through the rubble-strewn streets where survivors were beginning to gather. There was a sense of purpose in their movements, a shared understanding that they would rebuild, not just because they had to, but because it was who they were. They were the people of New Avalon, and they would not be defeated. Elena approached him as he reached the square, her expression tired but resolute. "We've stabilized most of the critical patients," she reported. "The Federation medics are taking over now. How are you holding up?" "I'll manage," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "We all will. The hardest part is behind us." Elena nodded, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The physical battle might be over, but the emotional and psychological scars would take much longer to heal. She looked around at the survivors, many of whom were beginning to organize themselves into work groups, clearing debris, salvaging what they could. There was something in that, something inspiring. "They'll follow you, Marcus. Just as they followed Sarah. We all will." "I hope I'm worthy of that," Marcus said, more to himself than to Elena. But there was no time for doubt. There was work to be done, and he would lead by example. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The Federation provided emergency supplies and support, but the bulk of the rebuilding efforts fell to the colonists themselves. Marcus coordinated the efforts, assigning tasks, ensuring that the most critical infrastructure was restored first. The energy shields were repaired, albeit at a reduced capacity, and makeshift shelters were erected to house those who had lost their homes. The elderly defenses, now fully under the control of the colonists, were reconfigured to act as additional security measures, a constant reminder of the ancient power that lay beneath the planet's surface. Despite the progress, there were moments when the sheer scale of the destruction threatened to overwhelm them. Entire sections of the colony were unrecognizable, reduced to twisted metal and ash. The loss of life was staggering, and as the days turned into weeks, the reality of what they had endured began to set in. The survivors held memorials for the fallen, including a ceremony to honor Sarah Whitlock and the others who had given their lives to protect the colony. It was a somber affair, marked by both grief and a steely resolve to move forward. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself increasingly relying on Elena. Her expertise in xenobiology had proven invaluable during the battle, and now, in the aftermath, she was at the forefront of the efforts to understand and utilize the elderly technology. They worked together, often late into the night, trying to unlock the full potential of the ancient systems. There were successes, new defenses were brought online, and energy sources were discovered that could be harnessed to aid in the colony's recovery. But there were also mysteries that remained unsolved, puzzles that refused to yield their secrets. One evening, as they pored over a set of ancient elderly schematics, Marcus glanced at Elena, who was studying the documents with an intensity that suggested she was close to a breakthrough. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found these defenses?" he asked. Elena looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "I try not to dwell on it, but yes. We were lucky, Marcus. More than lucky, really. But it also makes me think about how much we still don't know. The elderly built these defenses for a reason, and we barely scratched the surface of what they left behind. There's so much more to discover, and not just here. This technology could change everything, for New Avalon, for the entire Federation." Marcus nodded. "If we can unlock it." "We will," Elena said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "It's just a matter of time." Time. That was the one thing they had plenty of now, though it didn't always feel that way. The colony was secure, but the future was still uncertain. The Zelani might return, or another threat could emerge from the void. They couldn't afford to be complacent. Every day was a battle, not against an invading force, but against despair, against the urge to give up and leave this world behind. But Marcus knew that wasn't an option. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to abandon New Avalon now. And as long as there was breath in his body, he would ensure that the colony not only survived but thrived. The people of New Avalon had proven their strength, their resilience, and their willingness to fight for what was theirs. They had faced the darkness and had emerged victorious, and that victory would carry them forward. The days turned into months, and slowly, the colony began to rebuild. The scars of the battle were still visible, but there was also new growth, both literal and figurative. The fields that had been scorched by the Zelani were replanted, and the first green shoots of the new crops began to appear. The city was rebuilt, not exactly as it had been before, but stronger, more fortified, a testament to the resilience of its people. Marcus stood on the same balcony where he had watched the final moments of the battle, now repaired and overlooking a city that was beginning to flourish once more. Below him, the streets were filled with activity, people rebuilding their homes, children playing in the parks, the sounds of life returning to normal. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something new, something forged in the fires of adversity. Elena joined him, her gaze following his as they looked out over the colony. "We did it," she said softly, a note of pride in her voice. "We did," Marcus agreed. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much to do." "There always will be," Elena replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. "But for now, let's take a moment to appreciate how far we've come." They stood in silence for a while, letting the moment sink in. The battle had been won, but the war for New Avalon's future was ongoing. It was a war that would be fought not with weapons, but with determination, ingenuity, and an unbreakable spirit. And it was a war that they would win. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the colony, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had faced the darkness and had come through it stronger. New Avalon would endure, and so would they. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as they always had, and always would.